Welcome, Coleman Report Live. Lance Sexton, Bob Coleman, October Fall Edition. Lance, you and I are looking at the numbers. It looks like today's stock market, the attendees keep going up and up. Thank you all for your support. We got a lot of information. We have your questions, so thank you. But let's get into the poll questions. Oh, we're not doing poll questions. I apologize. Lance, yesterday I was on the SBA Connect call. I encourage all of you to take advantage of that. Every quarter, SBA does a call from both 7A, 504, and the information you get there is the same information you get at any of the regional trade shows, the national shows. Obviously it's free. It takes about an hour and a half. I'll ask your opinion on this, Lance. I've been reluctant to blast that out through our email list. I sort of think that's an SBA function. I don't know. Do you think that's anyway? Here's the answer. Get a hold of your local district and get on a list. That's the answer. I don't think that we should be doing that, but there's a lot of good information. This first dashboard that I have for you, this is the average turn time for SBA to process paperwork through these different organizations. Loan Guarantee Processing Center, they're doing 20 days, small loans, 3 days. I like the servicing actions. You're near dear to your heart. 2 days out of Little Rock, 5 days out of Fresno. And Herndon, they're saying if you do everything right, you're going to get paid in 30 days. Now, that's 30 business days, but those numbers are, I think they're working hard, Lance.
Well, when I was at SBA, Bob, one of the things that we worked on at that time, servicing actions were taking 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And we implemented a goal at that time. John Miller asked us to implement a goal of doing 90% of our servicing actions within 3 days. And it looks like Little Rock's still hanging in there with the 2-day turn time.
That's very impressive. Hey, this is the important stuff. SBA went through and did an analysis of the reviews they did last year ending September 30th. And these are the common mistakes that lenders have been criticized for in the review process. And let's go to underwriting. And here are the top 5. Oh, I'm sorry. First, eligibility. Lenders are making mistakes on size determinations. Lance, you and I talked about this. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of murkiness on eligible passive companies, ownership companies. The most common reason is the lease has to be the same as the term of the loan. But Lance, what's your opinion about lender errors in that area?
Well, EPCOC loans are kind of interesting, Bob, and you can be a student of the SOP 50105J and get surprised at times. And just recently, I got into a discussion with somebody at Citrus Heights, Bob, and I found out something I didn't know about EPCs. If you've got an EPC, the only property that it can hold is the property being leased to the operating company. And if you have an EPC that has multiple properties, it's not technically eligible for an SBA loan. And, I started questioning that, Bob, because up until January 1st, up until the 50105J was released, that was not an issue on eligibility. Well, they said, go to page 181 of the SOP 50105J. And guess what, Bob? There was one sentence in the SOP that indicated that was not eligible. Now, what is the fix, Bob? Have them form a new EPC, deed the property into that EPC, and you're fine.
But, or you can go to also a co-borrower situation in certain instances. Look, the takeaway in all this stuff, SBA constantly changed the regulations. What you did this year or in October of 2017 is different than 2018. When you have an EPC, Lance and I strongly recommend you go to the SOP, reread it. Same with debt refinancing. It's very well laid out there what you need to do, but lenders are being criticized because, Lance, they're not getting the underlying note. They're not going through and making a determination that it's eligible, that those original loan proceeds were eligible for purposes. And usually where lenders are getting tricked up is refinancing a note on a business acquisition loan.
Well, and one final comment here, Bob. This is another one that's come up recently. When you're collecting information for your SBA loan and that SBA Form 413 that we all collect from the borrowers, make sure your borrower doesn't dump their 401k into the cash category. and then submit a loan to Citrus Heights for approval, because you're going to have to jump through a lot of hoops. You know, they may have $500,000 in a 401k, which doesn't have to be looked at in a credit elsewhere review. But if they lump it into their cash account and don't provide, I mean,
they're ineligible. They're ineligible.
It needs to be separated, and there needs to be statements attached, a statement attached to verify that it's in a 401k. So, you know, I've never thought about that, Bob, because usually, you know, you see borrowers complete their PFS and they'll dump it in there. So make sure it's not. Make sure the cash accounts are checking accounts and savings accounts.
What I would do on these, and they're in the PowerPoint, is go ahead and download them and print them out. And since these are the most common errors that they found out in the lender reviews, both on-site and off-site, this is where I would go for an initial check. Form 1919. You know what the most common error was, Lance? Not that they didn't initial it, they didn't sign it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that, Bob. And on the borrower's part of the form, you know, there's 4 places, and you brought up the initial 4 places that require an initial. Now, not a big problem if you're submitting to Citrus Heights, because they're going to kick it back and say, hey, they need to initial these 4 spots. But it can be a problem when you're doing delegated authority loans and you neglect to get those initial.
Yeah, and by definition, if you don't have a signature, it is ineligible, and they made it very clear you don't have a guarantee. We've beat up on credit elsewhere. It's a mess in the industry. Make one of those 4 statements that we keep talking about. We're not going to spend time on that, other than you cannot have a standard statement that credit is unavailable elsewhere. We need to go to the next step, and we will keep talking about that. Now let's go to underwriting. Lenders aren't doing a proper collateral analysis per the SOP. We're not verifying equity injection. Again, Lance, this isn't rocket science. This is stuff we preach and SBA preaches, and all of these are reasons for a guaranteed denial. Lance, 3 things have to match. The credit memo has to match the loan authorization, has to match the use of proceeds loan disbursement. And we're not doing that. And if you make a change at closing, you need to go back and do an addendum of the credit memo. A common problem is the underwriter may have another co-borrower or another guarantor, and for some reason when we go to closing, that person drops off. And by definition, that's ineligible.
Well, and Bob, you bring up a great point. As you go through the process of underwriting and closing an SBA loan, there are changes that occur after the loan authorization is created. And if you're doing the loan under delegated authority, that's a unilateral action for you to make that loan authorization change, as long as it's prudent and documented with a memo attached to the loan authorization. But the problem is sometimes they'll make those changes, Bob, and they don't take care of it. Now, if you have a loan that's been submitted GP, those loan authorization changes do have to be submitted to the processing center until the loan is fully dispersed for concurrence. Once it's fully dispersed, all loan authorization changes are unilateral.
Yeah, let's make sure the 3 match. Underwriting projections. SBA telegraphed that if you have a loan that goes into early default, the first thing they're going to look at is what were the projections and why did the bank not understand that this loan cannot be repaid. Remember, by definition, when you sign that 1920, you are certifying that there's sufficient cash for the company to operate for 12 months. What they will do is they will go back to those projections, and you're going to have a serious problem when your gross profit margins are 30% higher than the RMA standard, or we have sales of $1.2 million, but next year, for some miraculous reason, we're going to pull down $2 million, Lance, when the average sales increase in that industry is only 10% a year.
Yeah.
Underwriters, please, you need to really be serious about taking a good, hard look at that, because your poor liquidators, when they put together that PDK package and the projections are off, it's tough for them to defend.
Yeah, that summary of assumptions that's attached to the projections that explains where the numbers come from, and that summary of assumptions showing the numbers are reasonable is so critical. Especially, Bob, you mentioned if it's early default.
Yeah, so just make sure you're within industry standards. We all know things happen. People die, there's disasters, and the reason why loans fail, you're not going to be criticized for that. But if your projections are way off to industry standards and don't pass the does this make sense test, you're going to have issues. So again, this is, Lance and I aren't preaching this. This is what SBA is telling the industry. Loan closing, Lance, near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely.
Guess what? We're not, the most common error in loan closing is we're not getting a lien on the collateral.
Yeah. And that's when you look at the most common reasons for repair on an SBA loan, not perfecting the lien is one of those. Getting that hazard insurance, guys, you got to do that. And I know the people that are on this call take care of that. Life insurance, one thing I recommend to you is go to the conferences, get connected with the life insurance providers that are experienced.
Really good companies.
Yeah, they're great. And if you're going to count seller financing as equity, you need to have the standby agreement and a copy of the note in the file executed. And you can't just have a seller note and say, okay, that's equity. And again, these, Bob, on GP loans are not as much of a problem, but on delegated authority loans, you've got to take care of it yourself.
And I'm repeating myself. I would take all these items, and when you have a separate person, whether it's an in-house reviewer or you're going to a third party, that say, hey, check these things. And maybe that and just make life simple. This is what the important stuff is. Servicing practices, Lance, you just did a webinar on that. Guess what? We don't understand site visits. We're releasing liens when we're not supposed to. Timely wrap-up reports. We talked about that yesterday. And this is a new one, Lance, that I'd like you to comment upon. Continued credit worthiness. Now, I don't think that's in the SOP, but what SBA is saying is we're seeing lenders out there who book it and ignore it.
Well, and I think this in particular, Bob, may be a problem with loans that are sold on the secondary market. I'm just speculating, but most banks collect financial statements, scrub those financial statements. So, I mean, it's not in the SOP.
Correct.
But the word prudent servicing is in the SOP, which means you need to be.
Yeah, so I think this is a new point of emphasis. If we want to collect those financial statements, and we should be instituting a policy of collecting, at least trying to get that information from the borrower. Now, if we can't get it, we can't get it, but at least we can go to SBA and say, hey, we're trying. But the borrower is being uncooperative.
And most of your banks or lending institutions are much like the one that I am with. We do a great job of collecting financial information, but it also is important, Bob, take a look at it, make sure they're still in decent shape.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the point.
Don't just grab it, scan it, stick it in the file.
Finally, third-party management. We discussed this. SBA, it wants to really understand what's happening with the fees. We've discussed this several times the last couple of weeks, so I'm not going to do that again. But again, point of emphasis, and the takeaway is just because the loan is being serviced by a third-party provider, that does not absolve you of responsibility.
One of the things that I want to throw out there just for thought, Bob, quite often LSPs are great. For small lending institutions that are doing a small number of SBA loans, they bring expertise to you. But
I'm all for it, yeah.
You know, a pretty common practice, Bob, is if you're working with the LSP and they charge you $3,000 for a package, then you charge the borrower a $3,000 packaging fee. I'm going to caution you against that. We're doing a webinar on 159 documentation here in a week or so. I'm going to caution you, that's when they say passing the fee along to the applicant. If they charge you $3 and you charge the borrower $3, that looks like passing it along.
If you are confused about the new 159 form, the new disclosures, don't worry. The majority of the questions today were on that. And I assume when we go to the NAGO conferences and the regional conferences, this is going to be the point of emphasis. So Lance, I know you're being ahead of the curve on this and trying to bring some clarity for all of us. Hey, yesterday we had one of our we got poll questions, and then we're going to play Stump the Professor. Have you ever started a litigation plan against an SBA loan borrower without completing the litigation plan? Lance, why are you asking this question?
Well, I look forward to the responses because yesterday in the webinar, a majority of the lenders had started litigation before preparing a litigation plan. And as we all know, litigation plans only have to be approved when the expenses are projected at 10,000 or it's unusual litigation. But you have to have a litigation plan on any SBA loan where you're going to start litigation against the borrower.
And Lance, you made an important point. You needed the litigation plan, but they don't all have to go to SBA to be approved. So that's the takeaway, is put down on paper what you're planning on doing. How many of your SBA loans in litigation have had, I guess this is legal expenses, Lance, legal expenses over 10 grand?
Well, and this is where we hit the watermark. And the takeaway from yesterday, I'm going to say it real quickly, Bob. If you've got a litigation budget, say $7,500 or more, you need to put a contingency in there, bring it up to 10,000, get it approved by SBA, so you don't have problems getting reimbursed for your legal expenses.
Yeah, please put in that contingency. And Lance, if you get an estimated of 10 grand, can we put it for 13.5?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with beefing up your litigation budget to get the approval. Guys, there's never been someone in SBA that's going to say, your litigation budget was 12,000 and you spent 7. Oh, no. But if you have a budget of 7,000 and spend 12 and don't get it approved, then you got a problem.
Takeaway, it's perfectly legitimate to have a contingency. SBA, they understand things happen when we go into litigation. And that was a great takeaway. Finally, this is a point of emphasis. I hate to use that buzzword that Lance is focusing on. Have you received an invoice from SBA for a missing wrap-up report? And when I talk about an invoice, I'm talking about, hey, the guarantee has been paid, and they say, we paid you a couple $100,000 2 years ago, and we want that money back. It sort of ruins someone's day, doesn't it, Lance?
January is probably when we first started seeing some invoices filter out. Guys, there's still time. If you go in your PARAs, go into SBA 1, click on the PARA score icon up top, look at the loans that have been in liquidation for more than 3 years. If there's a loan on that list that hadn't been wrapped up, get it wrapped up.
Get it wrapped up. And for those of you who said yes, hopefully it was resolved. For those of you who answered no, do what Lance said. Make sure we're wrapped up, because invoices, they are coming. Yesterday, we played Stump the Professor. Lance was doing his presentation on litigation and CPC care and preservation of collateral expenses. And Lance had put it on the slide. On one of your slides, you said type of non-recoverable expenses are PBA. And Jerry said, well, what is that? And Lance said, I don't know.
Well, Bob, it was one of those slides where I was trying to condense it where it would fit the slide. And, yesterday, it's not Professional Bull Riders Association, Bob. It's protective bid analysis. If you're going into foreclosure and you're calculating what your bid's going to be, it's not a recoverable expense to charge a fee for conducting protective bid analysis.
Very good, Jerry. Thank you for that. We get to embarrass Lance over that from time to time. Mike has, and this is a great question. It's a very common question where we have routine litigation that should have been less than 10 grand, but there was a bankruptcy, there were issues, and now we have adversary actions, and our legal fees blew past the 10 grand. We then submitted the litigation plan. SCB is trying to reject reimbursement for the expenses we incurred prior to submitting it. In other words, the expenses between the plan and the new plan. We disagree.
Two takeaways here, Bob. The proactive solution is what we talked about a minute ago. Put a contingency in there, get it up to 10 grand, get it approved, you'll have no problems. The other thing that I encourage every SBA lender to do is get to know your district office staff, which includes district office legal counsel. I'm not saying that it would have changed what happened here. My first recommendation is put a contingency in, get it to 10, get it approved, but know your district legal counsel. They're the ones who approve the litigation plans to begin with. And maybe you could have avoided the decline on litigation expenses when that change occurred if you had a strong relationship with district counsel. But the best solution is make sure if it's anywhere close to 10, put a contingency in, get it to 10, get it approved.
In this case, Lance, the lender's going to eat the fee, correct?
Yeah, that's my thought, Bob.
Yeah. Another stumper on Lance is from Ian. Lance, are we allowed to have a property, let's say we have a loan of $500,000 and we've been lucky over the last couple of years that the value has escalated and now we think we can sell it for $800,000. Can we just release SBA from the guarantee and keep the profit?
Well, of course, Bob, after going through yesterday, I now know the answer. And first of all, guys, I'm gonna throw a little support my way. How many times have I had a litigation case where the collateral sold for more than the existing principal balance? Zero. But if you do create a profit from the sale of collateral in a liquidation case, you cannot release SBA and you have to share the profit.
Well, you can release SBA, but you have to share the profit with
You don't have to share the profit.
Yeah. So that was, we stumped you twice. I don't think that's ever happened before, Lance. I love it. Hey, next week, Barry Sloan, president of NewTek, is going to start off the top of the hour. He's going to talk about a couple of things, but one of the things I'm going to ask him is for those of you who make your living in SBA lending, the secondary market has been slowly declining. It was in their public reports, so we're going to ask them about that and what their plans are for 2019. So that's very gracious of him, and I think you'll like what you have to say. This is a great event, and it's a free event, and I encourage you, if you are interested in all of rural lending, USDA lending, get yourself to Washington, D.C. It's sponsored by the National Rural Lenders Roundtable. There is no fee to attend. You got to pay airfare and show up there. But we've been doing this now for a number of years. The keynote speaker, I think I stumbled over this last year, Senator Perdue, and also Congressman Adderholt will be there, as well as staff. So it's a great event. If USDA B&I is important to you, get to Washington, D.C. And Thomas is going to talk about that next week.
Well, and the Cosmos Club is a great place, Bob.
And it is. And the day before the Coleman event, and Lance, I think we just confirmed you as a speaker on what to do. And we're making an offer. The price is up to $12.95. Hey, if you register just give us a call. You don't have to pay us by tomorrow. But if you want to come, we'll honor that $9.95 price. Let Joseph or myself know. And it's good. What's interesting on both of these events is it's going to be after the election. So that's always fascinating of what the election means for those two entities. Oh, we're running out of time. I respect your time. Lance, we're announcing this. What is this event we're going to do in January?
It's a loan certification update for the loan closers. It's going to be a live event. It's an opportunity not just for people who have not participated, but people who have participated before to recertify as a SBA loan closer, and also an opportunity for new loan closers who've not participated to get valuable training, intensive training on SBA loan closing topics. Lance's
online video won a major award for our industry, and so we're giving you two ways to do it. You can do it online still, there it is, or you can do it in person. So it's a one-day event in Marina Del Rey in West LA, end of January. We have two webinars coming up that we mentioned. Lance, we're talking about November 1st. The rules are changing. Lance is going to go through those changes. And I'm going to do my third annual medical practice professional financing webinar. Lance, I love the numbers. Thank you all very much for your support. Keep those cards and letters coming. Let us know what you like and what you don't like, and keep the questions coming, especially the ones that can stump Lance. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.